Bad luck. Raymond's luck had never been good. If he played a slot machine all day, the guy after him would be the one to hit big. Work was shit, and Diane had gone to her mother's house to take a breather from their marriage. So when he saw that black cat lurking on the side of the rural back road, just waiting to cross his path, he snapped, swerving out of his way to take out the little omen of doom was an impulse. Afterwards, Raymond took a minute on the shoulder to slow his breathing. He couldn't believe he'd done it, and was consumed with regret. As he shifted back into the road, his phone buzzed. "Hey, I'm coming home tonight. Let's talk it out." His heart jumped into his throat. This had to be a good sign. An impulsive thought pushed its way into his brain. Could this be the way to short-circuit bad luck? Taking it out at the source? He let out a dark chuckle and was clumsily texting a reply back when his back window exploded into diamond-like shrapnel. Dropping his phone, Raymond overcorrected, slamming his car into the sturdy trunk of an oak. Between the ringing in his ears and the blood in his eyes, he barely perceived the young woman approaching his car. The cat, that damned black cat, was draped over her left forearm. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a breathy whisper escaped. He looked down to see the lever that once controlled his blinker erupting from his ribcage. The girl reached in to collect a smear of blood, which she ran through the cat's fur. Raymond's last moments were quick. Marley couldn't remember a time without Felix. He'd always been a gentle, cuddly companion on lonely days in the cabin. After her mom ran off, Grammy had done her best to give Marley a good childhood, and Felix had been a token to help her adjust. She almost never let him out, but he'd managed to slip out as she was taking in groceries. She just walked up on him when she saw the headlights and the carnage left behind. The driver hadn't even noticed her as she swooped in to grab her friend. As the car pulled away, she grabbed the rock. Muscle memory from years of softball and a heavy dose of rage sent it sailing into the truck's window. She refused to make eye contact with the man wheezing in the driver's seat. Grammy had taught her how to care for a cat like Felix. She swiped the blood into the matted fur and watched as his little body began to knit itself back together. Marley knew in a few hours he'd be back to his old self, albeit in need of a good bath. Most people had heard about cats being able to live more than one life. Luckily, Marley knew the trick was that there had to be an exchange. Hairball. Here's an urban legend from Japan. The origin of this legend is unknown, but there are reports of several deaths that might be connected. It's said that in some provinces, if a man kills a cat, he will be cursed. This curse will start with a cough. He will cough for hours and hours and hours, until his sleeves are stained by blood. Then, his hair will fall out, all at once. Nothing can stop this. Finally, the man will be visited that night. A black cat will slip into his room and slash his neck open with its claws, purring and leaving. His body will be found the next morning, stuffed with his own hair. Brutus in the corner. Even before his daughter was born, before they moved to the house on Redwood Avenue, John found the cat disagreeable. His newlywed's companion, a black, green-eyed feline named Brutus, oiled around corners and furniture, into dark, stuffy places. It was a wormy thing, he thought. Soon after marrying, they and Brutus took up residence at their new home. The little creature is haunted too, he thought, for whenever John clacked away at the typewriter in his new study, Brutus sat curled near the radiator, occupying a spot in his periphery. The cat stared, through sliver-thin pupils, into the upper corner of the room, at nothing, at least nothing he could see. It became a ritual. Like an old tree, Brutus rooted himself by the radiator and watched the shadowy corner. Then, like nothing, he would get up and go. It happened so often that one evening Deborah folded a blanket and, in dramatic announcement, dubbed the spot Brutus's lair. John worked hard and often on a novel. On some evenings, at times when Brutus crept into the room and nestled himself into his lair and stared, John felt that the room seemed all at once cold and uncanny. "Shoo! Shoo, Brutus!" John felt better with the green-eyed devil absent. It seemed Brutus took the hint. When Deborah got pregnant, they moved the secretary, anointed John's office with light purple paint, airy white curtains, and a pinewood crib. Soon baby Jess was born. All hours of the night she cried, the first night home from the hospital, and the next, and the next. Soon, through nearly every waking hour, Jess squealed. Worry crept into the Martin home. Each doctor gave a different answer. From medicine to Mozart, nothing could allay Jess's unspoken distress. Deborah and John hardly slept. One afternoon, John sighed and abandoned a half-made sandwich on the counter, responding to the eruption of cries from upstairs. At the top landing, he paused. What he saw churned his stomach like expired meat. Slowly, belly to the floor, Brutus slunk out of Jess's room. At the same time her cries ceased. The conscious mind seldom probes the depths of the unconscious. John was no exception. Through the haze of years, a documentary came to him and reminded, the Egyptians worshipped cats. They were said to bring good fortune. From elsewhere came images of ladders, spilled salt, 13, and black cats. Anything capable of being a charm can be an omen. He thought of the ghoulish cat in Pet Sematary, and he remembered the strange sentiment of those late winter evenings alone with the cat. An absurd, surely absurd notion came into his mind, but he shackled the idea, hardly letting it form, never mind escape his mouth, and much less he considered bringing it up to Deborah. For she loved the cat, and he loved her. But many other times that winter, John noticed, on a level more or less conscious, the relation between Brutus in the corner and his daughter's wailing. After 3 months, the constant cries became less frequent. So did Brutus's visits to her room. Jess grew. She began to walk and talk. A twin bed soon replaced the pinewood crib. For years, not a peep could be heard from Jess's room at night. She slept soundly, and Brutus ultimately found a new lair, proclaimed Deborah, with a weak and weepy voice. For not long after Jess entered elementary school, Her beloved cat had run away. Years passed. John's book was published and received praise, so much so as to demand a sequel, and another. Deborah, despite being near the end of her natural childbearing years, swelled with the urge to give more life to the Martin home, and in the absence of Brutus, she felt the absence of something small to love. So they began trying for another. But as Jess entered the 4th grade, the real problems began. It was at first night terrors, then sleepwalking. Her grades dropped. Psychotherapy, employed quickly and through the proper channels, did nothing. John noticed dark circles pendulating like dark sandbags underneath her eyes, a weariness and weightedness unnatural for a 12-year-old. In short, cruel weeks, the Jess that had been unfolding like a flower before them into gregariousness and vivacity, shrunk. She was pulled from school, unable to carry a conversation without drifting off into dissociation. It was not only that things around the house would turn up broken, burned, or disfigured, but odd happenings began for which the Martins had no rational explanation. It was until the evening of the 6th of November that the Martins were resolute atheists and disbelievers of an outspoken variety in organized religion. That evening, Deborah found her daughter scratching the walls of her room with bloody, chipped fingers, quite nearly to the bone. Stitches and several more tests were performed at the hospital. Nothing physiologically, that damned word, physiologically, wrong, they told her. In the evening, she took her mother's antique rosary and draped it over the handle of her child's dead-bolted door. The next night, John found Jess craned in the corner, facing away from the door. Black knotted hair obscured the shape of her small head, for at this point, Jess bit and scratched through any attempts at forced hygiene. From the corner, she spoke in a language too fluent to be the babble of a 10-year-old's imagination, but nothing John had ever heard. John and Deborah took time off from work to deal with their daughter's crisis. One stayed at home at all times, while the other went out for the occasional blessed errand. For a month more, this continued. Jess withered. One winter morning, 20 pounds too slim and delirious from lack of sleep, John stood at the door clutching a bag of groceries and wondered if had not finally slipped into madness. There, 2 green familiar eyes looked up at him. He bursted out crying, then laughing, then crying again. Deborah was in disbelief for nearly the whole afternoon, but upon acceptance that their cat of nearly 4 years, departed, had came back to them, was convinced it was a sign of good fortune. Now, Brutus was often found standing at the closed door, patient and pensive in his old manner. Then one day, it all stopped. In the morning, after getting off the phone with the parish, John unlocked the bolt and entered his daughter's room. She sat up in bed, bright-eyed. The torrent of clothes, books, and trash that had accumulated throughout the room were now tucked neatly into cubbies and drawers. "Good morning, Daddy." Waves of relief and love flood over John's body. He kissed his daughter on the forehead. She looked upward, eyes swimming with affection. From the corner of his vision, he saw Brutus sitting in his usual spot. But something was different. The conscious mind seldom probes the depths of the unconscious. John was no exception. He remembered the pattern, the coming and going of Brutus. At the moment, John's subconscious recalled a term from one of his college statistics courses. It floated up like an old shoe in the lake. To the light of his thought came the term, confounding variable. Cats are aware of the existence of God. Perhaps they are aware of the existence of other spirits. His green eyes, in a familiar way, fixed directly on Jess. "Good night, Daddy," she said, through a smile wide and precious. Thank you so much for joining me. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess_of.darkness or Twitter at duchessofdark N2. Also, please send me your stories or poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. Until next time.